She loved him through everything. But when success changed him, her heart finally broke. Can love survive ambition, betrayal, and heartbreak? This is the story of Sydney and Antonio, a friendship turned into a love tested by wealth, temptation, and regret. Stay tuned, because their story will leave you breathless. The morning air in Boston was crisp but gentle, carrying a faint hint of the harbor. Sydney Cox stirred her coffee slowly, letting the warmth seep into her hands as she glanced across the small table. Antonio Sawyer sat opposite her, tall and casually elegant, a navy coat draped over the back of his chair, his expression calm yet contemplative. He stirred his own cup absent-mindedly, eyes tracing the steam curling from the mug. It had been years since college, years that had molded them both, pushed them toward dreams they had only whispered about in dorm rooms and late-night libraries. Yet here they were, in the familiar comfort of their favorite cafe on Newbury Street, laughing like teenagers, the world beyond their table fading into soft focus. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Sydney asked, a teasing smile playing on her lips. She traced the rim of her cup with a fingertip, letting her gaze flicker to the bustling street outside, then back to him. Antonio's lips quirked, amusement sparkling in those piercing blue eyes. "High school cafeteria, right? You stole my lunch because you thought I looked hungry." Sydney laughed, a rich, melodic sound that drew a few curious glances from nearby patrons. "Technically, you were hungry. You barely ate anything for weeks. I thought someone should keep you alive." He leaned back, mock indignation creasing his features. "And now look at me. Apparently, I'm thriving, thanks to the lunch lady from 9th grade." "Not just the lunch, Tony," she corrected, rolling her eyes playfully. "I've been keeping you alive with advice, encouragement, and occasionally scolding you into focus. Don't forget that part." Antonio's laughter softened into a smile, the kind that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "I could never forget that part. You've been my anchor, Sid. From day one." Her chest warmed at his words, though she tried to hide it behind a casual sip of coffee. Their friendship had always carried an unspoken current, a bond forged through years of laughter, shared homework stress, late-night pizza runs, and dreams that seemed impossibly large. And somewhere along the line, that current had deepened into something neither of them had dared to name. The memory of their university days was vivid and bittersweet. Antonio had been quiet, a brilliant mind tucked behind a calm exterior. Sydney, vibrant and full of light, had been the opposite. Talkative, quick-witted, endlessly supportive. She often joked that one day she would manage his tech empire while he built it, teasing him about board meetings and investor pitches as if they were already part of their shared future. "You realize," she had said one night during a late study session, "when you're running the biggest tech company in the country, I'm going to be the one keeping you from making completely idiotic decisions." Antonio had chuckled, his head resting against his hand as he balanced his laptop precariously on the edge of the library table. "And what if I don't want you to stop me from being idiotic? Then I'll just roll my eyes and pretend you're still my little genius," she had replied, her tone light but her eyes earnest. "But trust me, Tony, I'll always be here, even if you think you don't need me." Those nights, illuminated by the soft glow of desk lamps and scattered textbooks, had been the foundation of everything. Laughter had mixed with whispered dreams, shared frustrations, and stolen glances that lingered a heartbeat too long. By the time they graduated, love had quietly, almost imperceptibly, taken root. After university, life had tested them. Sydney had taken a modest job at a local consulting firm, her days filled with spreadsheets and client meetings. Antonio, brilliant as he was, struggled to find his footing in the professional world. Interviews ended politely, then with gentle rejections. Nights blurred into mornings as he sent emails and made calls. And still, nothing seemed to click. Sydney had been there through it all, offering what little she could. She had lent him money for rent more than once, cooked dinners for him when she could, and most importantly, had believed in him when he had begun to doubt himself. "You're going to do something incredible, Tony," she told him one chilly February evening as they huddled on the couch in her small apartment. She handed him a steaming mug of cocoa, their fingers brushing briefly. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." He had looked at her then, that mix of admiration and quiet desperation etched in his features. "What would I do without you, Sid?" "You'd survive, probably," she teased, though her voice held a tenderness that undercut the jest. "But you'd be miserable, and nobody wants that." It was one of Sydney's contacts, a former professor now working as an angel investor, who had ultimately given Antonio the break he needed. A single meeting had led to another, and soon enough the foundations of Sawyer Innovations were being laid. He had been overwhelmed, unsure, and yet utterly determined. And from the very beginning, Sydney had been there, not just as his manager, but as his partner in every sense. They had spent long nights in small rented offices, drafting business plans and brainstorming prototypes. They celebrated every minor victory: the first software beta that didn't crash, the first client who actually signed a contract, the first investor handshake that felt like validation of years of struggle. "You realize," Sydney had said during one particularly grueling week, rubbing her temples as Antonio feverishly sketched ideas on a whiteboard, "we might actually pull this off. You, me, and a lot of caffeine." Antonio had smiled, a rare, relaxed smile, letting out a long breath. "We've come too far to fail now. And I mean it, Sid. I'd never want to do this with anyone else. And I'd never let you get away with ruining it," she countered with a wink. As Sawyer Innovations grew, so did the demands. Investors, media appearances, product launches, all of it required more than just brilliance. It demanded sacrifices, late nights, and an unwavering focus. Through it all, Antonio and Sydney remained side by side. But something subtle had begun to change. One evening, after signing a particularly large investor deal, Antonio leaned back in his chair, exhaustion and triumph mingling in his expression. "Sid," he said softly, "no matter what happens, no matter how big this gets, we'll never change. Promise me that." Sydney smiled, her eyes reflecting both pride and a hint of unease she didn't yet understand. "I promise. But you'll have to promise me too, Tony. No matter what, we don't let this success make us forget who we are." He took her hand across the sleek conference table, squeezing it gently. "Never. I'd rather fail with you than succeed without you." That night, Sydney walked back to her apartment, the cool Boston air brushing against her cheeks. She replayed the day's events in her mind. Antonio's confident handshake with the investor, the look of triumph on his face, the subtle glimmer of pride that made him seem almost untouchable. She had watched him, heart swelling with admiration and love, and yet beneath that pride she felt a small, unnameable stir of apprehension. There was a hunger in him she had never seen before. Not the hunger for success, exactly, but something sharper, fiercer, something that whispered of ambition without boundaries. As she unlocked her door and stepped inside, the apartment felt unusually quiet. She placed her bag down and leaned against the counter, staring at the empty room for a long moment. Her fingers brushed the cool surface of the table, and she allowed herself to imagine what the coming months would bring. She trusted him deeply. She believed in the man he was and the bond they shared. But the future, she realized, would demand more than friendship, more than shared dreams. It would demand vigilance, patience, and perhaps a courage neither of them had yet needed. Sydney sank into the couch, the city lights from the window casting soft shadows across the room. She thought of Antonio, of his brilliant mind, of the way his eyes had shone with hope and determination today, and she made a silent vow. No matter how much the world changed, no matter how big Sawyer Innovations became, she would remember why she loved him. Because they had started together, and because their dreams had always been intertwined. Somewhere deep inside, she sensed that the man she loved, the boy who had become a brilliant businessman, was on the cusp of a transformation. A new hunger was emerging, one that could either carry them to heights they had never imagined, or put everything they had built at risk. Sydney let out a long, quiet sigh, closing her eyes for a moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new triumphs, and new tests of their bond. But tonight she allowed herself the simple joy of pride, love, and the quiet certainty that they had, at least for now, everything worth cherishing. And as the city hummed outside her window, she couldn't shake the feeling that the most important chapter of their story, the one that would test the very foundation of their love, had not yet begun. The skyline of Boston glimmered against the night, a city alive with ambition and excess, and Antonio Sawyer moved through it like a man possessed. Limousines, cameras, clinking glasses, and the constant hum of media attention had become the soundtrack of his life. Sawyer Innovations had grown faster than anyone could have predicted, and with that growth came invitations to every gala, every launch party, every high-profile event that mattered in the world of tech and wealth. Antonio attended, them all with the same easy charm that had made him magnetic in college, only now there was a sharpness behind the smile, a hunger in his eyes that wasn't just for success but for admiration, attention and power, each night blurred into the next, champagne, accolades, selfies with influencers, and promises made to investors that sometimes required every ounce of patience and tact to fulfill. And through it all, Sydney Cox struggled to keep the company and him grounded. She managed the day-to-day operations, negotiated contracts, kept the investors' questions from becoming crises, and tried to navigate the increasingly treacherous waters of Antonio's ego. It had started subtly. A dismissive wave during a meeting, a short, impatient sigh when she suggested caution. At first, Sydney tried to laugh it off, reminding herself and him of where they had started. A small office, no investors, no media glare, just the two of them, building something together from nothing. "Tony," she said during one board meeting, watching him brush aside a suggested change, "we've worked hard to maintain this balance. Maybe we should consider a more cautious approach." He had smiled then, his smile sharp, polished, and unreadable. "You worry too much, Sid. This is how success looks." That had been the first sting, subtle and almost unnoticeable. But the hits came faster after that. He began flirting at events, charming other women in ways that made her stomach twist even when she told herself it was harmless. He criticized her work more openly, dismissing months of her careful planning with a single sentence. She tried to hold on to the humor and the warmth that had always defined their relationship. She reminded herself of their first victories, of late nights laughing over spreadsheets, of the shared dreams that had brought them together. But as Antonio's arrogance grew, so did the distance between them. It wasn't until she saw it, the photo, that her heart truly shattered. A viral image on social media, Antonio stepping out of a nightclub arm in arm with another woman, laughing with a carefree abandon that made Sydney's chest ache. She stared at it frozen, the world around her falling silent. She didn't cry immediately. The disbelief came first, the numbing, hollow sensation that sometimes accompanies betrayal. But that night, alone in her apartment, the tears came. Silent, stifled, falling onto the pillow as she clutched her phone, staring at the image again and again. The man she had loved, the boy who had promised to never let success change him, was now someone she barely recognized. The following weeks were a blur. She withdrew emotionally, retreating into the office, into work that at least obeyed logic and rules. There she could feel some semblance of control, some measure of accomplishment that wasn't tainted by Antonio's growing indifference. And yet, even in that sanctuary, he found reasons to criticize, to belittle her, to make her second-guess herself. "Sydney, we can't afford this delay. Did you even review the proposal before sending it?" His voice had been sharp, not unkindly, but cutting enough to leave her heart bruised. "I did," she had replied softly, trying to meet his eyes. "The numbers all align with the investors' expectations." He had sighed, impatient. "Then why does it feel like we're always one step behind? You need to anticipate, not react." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to remind him that she had built half of this empire with him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, swallowing the bitter taste of hurt. One morning, Sydney arrived at the office early, the city still quiet outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. She walked past the receptionist with a polite nod, her heels clicking softly on the polished floors. Her gaze fell on her nameplate, Sydney Cox, executive manager. And in that moment, the truth hit her with staggering clarity. She had spent years pouring herself into Antonio, into Sawyer Innovations, into a vision they had shared. But in doing so, She had lost pieces of herself. The laughter had dimmed, the joy of partnership had faded, replaced by tension, neglect, and the constant feeling of inadequacy in the face of Antonio's relentless ambition. That night, back in the solitude of her apartment, Sydney sat at her desk. The city light spilled in, casting a soft glow on the papers she had spread before her. Her fingers hovered over her laptop keyboard. Then the notepad where she had scribbled her thoughts for months. Frustrations, hopes, dreams, and moments of quiet heartbreak. Finally, she opened a fresh page and began to write, her pen moving with deliberate clarity. Antonio, I have given everything to this company, to us, to the dreams we once shared. But in giving, I have lost myself. I cannot continue sacrificing my heart, my peace, my sense of self for someone who no longer sees me, who no longer seems to remember the bond that made us strong. I am resigning from Sawyer Innovations, effective immediately. Until you remember who you are and what we built, we have nothing left to share. Sydney. The letter was concise, direct, and filled with quiet power. She placed it neatly on Antonio's desk before leaving, the click of her heels echoing like a farewell through the empty office. The next morning, the city had awakened to the hum of traffic and early commuters, but Antonio arrived late, as was now his habit. His coat hung loosely over his arm as he stepped into the building, the assistant at the front desk giving him a hesitant glance. Mr. Sawyer, she said, her voice careful. There's something for you on your desk. He raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued, and strode toward his office. The space was familiar, sleek, minimalistic, dominated by screens and whiteboards, but today it felt oddly empty. His footsteps echoed unnaturally as he neared his desk. Then he saw it, a crisp white envelope, his name handwritten in Sydney's familiar script. He picked it up, the weight of it heavier than any investor contract or legal agreement he had ever held. With trembling fingers, he opened it. The words inside hit him like a punch to the chest, each sentence tearing at a part of him he hadn't realized was still fragile. Until you remember who you are and what we built, we have nothing left to share. Antonio sank into his chair, the office around him suddenly suffocating. For months he had moved through life like a conqueror, never pausing to consider the quiet strength beside him, the woman who had built his dreams alongside him. And now she had left, not in anger, not in a dramatic confrontation, but quietly, irrevocably. He ran a hand through his hair, the first pangs of regret settling deep into his chest. The parties, the accolades, the fame, none of it mattered without Sydney. The very foundation of his life, the partner he had promised never to forget, was gone from his world. Antonio leaned back, staring at the ceiling as the hum of the city filtered through the glass walls. For the first time in years, he felt small, vulnerable, and painfully aware of what he had lost. Meanwhile, Sydney sat in her apartment, a soft breeze brushing against the curtains. She had left the office, left the tension, left the man she still loved, but who had forgotten how to love her in return. She felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for what had been, relief for reclaiming a piece of herself she hadn't realized was missing. Her phone vibrated occasionally with messages from coworkers, checking in, offering support, but she didn't answer immediately. Tonight she allowed herself the quiet, the solitude, and the tears that came unbidden. She thought of the early days, of shared laughter over coffee in that tiny Boston cafe, of late nights dreaming aloud about the future. Those memories were hers alone now, a bittersweet archive of what had once been perfect in its simplicity. And yet, as the night deepened and the city outside sparkled with lights and life, she felt a flicker of something stronger than heartbreak, a sense of clarity, of knowing that she could exist, thrive, and honor herself, even in the absence of the man she had loved so fiercely. Tomorrow would bring decisions, perhaps even confrontation, but tonight she allowed herself to simply breathe, to feel, to grieve, and to reclaim the quiet dignity she had almost forgotten. The world outside continued in its relentless pace, and somewhere among the towering skyscrapers and neon lights, Antonio Sawyer began to understand the magnitude of the loss he had allowed. Sydney had left a void, not just in the office, but in his life, his heart, and his very soul. And for the first time he realized that success without love was nothing at all. Until you remember who you are and what we built, we have nothing left to share. The words echoed in his mind long after the envelope had been read, long after the city had gone to sleep. They lingered like a silent accusation and a plea, all at once, a reminder that no amount of wealth or acclaim could replaced the love he had taken for granted. And somewhere in that quiet heartbreak, a seed of reckoning had been planted. Antonio Sawyer stared at the empty chair in his office, the silence of the space pressing against him like a living weight. The city hummed faintly beyond the glass walls, traffic lights blinking, distant sirens wailing, but none of it penetrated the emptiness inside him. He could still hear it, Sydney's laughter, soft and melodic, echoing in the corners of his mind. That laughter, once a constant in his life, had become an almost painful memory, a reminder of the warmth and light he had taken for granted. The days stretched into weeks. The opulent parties, the endless meetings, the women whose smiles had once drawn him in, none of it mattered anymore. Wealth felt hollow. Luxury felt meaningless. Even the accolades from investors and the media praise were like faint whispers, unable to touch the gaping void left by her absence. He had all the things he had ever dreamed of, but he had lost the one thing that truly mattered. Nights became his only time of reflection. He wandered the streets of Boston, retracing the paths they had walked together years ago. He passed the cafe where they had met after college, peering through the glass at strangers laughing over coffee. He thought of the countless afternoons spent there, planning, dreaming, supporting each other in ways that had felt effortless then. The park came next. Autumn leaves crunched beneath his feet as he walked the paths where they had shared dreams and whispered possibilities about the future. He stopped at a familiar bench and sat, letting the cold air fill his lungs as he remembered her. Her bright eyes, her gentle teasing, the way she had believed in him when no one else did, and he realized with a sinking weight in his chest that he had betrayed that belief, allowed pride and ambition to overshadow love. One night as the city lights flickered against the harbor, Antonio broke down. He slumped against the cold marble of his office floor, unshaven and exhausted, eyes glistening with tears he had long denied. His assistant, Julia, stepped cautiously into the room, unsure whether to speak. "I had everything," he said, voice breaking raw, "and I destroyed it. I destroyed her. I destroyed us." Julia said nothing, giving him space. She had seen this side of Antonio before, the brilliance, the charm, the confidence, but never this vulnerability. It was almost terrifying how human he looked, stripped of the armor he had built over the years. The next morning, Antonio made a decision. He left his office early, bypassing calls, emails, and meetings, and walked the familiar streets toward Sydney's apartment. Each step felt heavy, weighted with remorse and hope, a precarious mix that made his chest ache. He arrived uncertain, unshaven, dressed in a casual suit that felt foreign in his hands. His heart pounded as he rang the doorbell. When Sydney opened the door, her expression shifted from casual greeting to wide-eyed shock. "Antonio," she whispered, taking a step back as if the sight of him threatened to break her fragile defenses. He looked at her, vulnerable in a way he had never been before. I don't know if you'll let me in. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I needed you to see me, the real me, before it's too late." For a long moment, Sydney simply studied him. She could see the exhaustion, the rawness, the sincerity in his eyes. The man before her was not the arrogant, distant figure who had dismissed her feelings. This was the boy she had once known, the man she had loved, stripped of pride, entirely human. I don't know if I can," she said softly. "You hurt me, Antonio, more than I can even describe. How do I know this isn't just another phase?" He stepped closer, his voice trembling with emotion. "You believed in me when I had nothing, when the world would have told you to leave me behind. And I failed you, but now, I'd give up everything I've built to earn your belief again. Not because I want to be rich, not because I want the accolades, but because I want you." Her chest tightened and tears pricked her eyes. The sincerity in his gaze, the raw emotion he carried, broke through the walls she had carefully built around her heart. She took a tentative step forward, allowing herself to meet his gaze fully, searching for the boy she had fallen in love with years ago. And there he was, beneath the layers of pride and ambition, the man she had loved with all her heart. Reconciliation did not come in grand gestures or over-the-top apologies. It came slowly, in long conversations filled with tears, confessions, and the rebuilding of trust. Antonio learned to listen again, to value her opinions, to see the effort and love she had poured into both the company and their relationship. Sydney, in turn, allowed herself to hope cautiously, letting the warmth of the man she had loved seep back into her heart. Months passed, filled with quiet dinners, long walks through the Boston streets, and moments of laughter that felt both fragile and precious. They rebuilt the foundation that had cracked under the weight of ambition, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. And then came Sydney's birthday, a surprise she had never expected. Friends, colleagues, and family gathered in a beautifully decorated hall. The room was a swirl of laughter, soft lighting, and the aroma of fresh flowers. Antonio had planned it meticulously, though it had been impossible to hide his nervous energy. The celebration paused when he rose, moving toward her with a small box in hand. The chatter quieted as he dropped to one knee, gazing up at her with a tenderness that left her breathless. "You've been my beginning, my reason, and now I want you to be my forever," he said, his voice unwavering, full of love and humility. The room seemed to hold its breath. The only sound, the quiet rustle of silk dresses and soft murmurs. Tears spilled down Sydney's cheeks as she nodded, her voice choked but firm. "Yes, Antonio, yes," the applause erupted, but all they could see was each other, each heartbeat syncing with the other as they sealed their promise with a kiss. The wedding was nothing short of breathtaking. A grand historic venue overlooked the Boston harbor, golden lights reflecting on the water, the gentle lapping of waves, providing a natural accompaniment to the live orchestra. White roses adorned every corner, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh blooms and delicate perfume. Guests dressed elegantly, murmuring with anticipation as Sydney walked down the aisle in a flowing ivory gown. Antonio stood at the altar, his eyes glistening with emotion, tears falling freely as he took in the sight of her. Every step she took felt like a memory revisited, every beat of her heart in rhythm with his. Their vows echoed through the hall, raw and heartfelt. "I promise to never take you for granted," Antonio said, voice steady despite the tears. "I promise to listen, to love, and to honor the bond that has carried us through everything. You are my heart, my home, my beginning and my end." Sydney's voice trembled but was strong. "I promise to love you, to forgive, and to walk beside you through every triumph and trial. We've built our dreams together, and I will never let them, or us, be broken again." The ring ceremony followed, soft light reflecting on gold bands and sparkling stones, the orchestra's melody rising like a gentle tide. They exchanged rings, kissed, and the room erupted in joyous applause. Weeks later, after their honeymoon, they sat by a private terrace overlooking the ocean, the sun casting a warm golden glow over their quiet retreat. Sydney, nestled against Antonio's chest, placed a hand over his and smiled. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. Antonio looked down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What is it?" Her smile widened, eyes glistening. "I'm pregnant." His hands held hers tightly, tears of joy slipping freely down his cheeks. "Now I'll never forget what really matters," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. The world outside could wait. In that moment, all that mattered was the life they had rebuilt together, the love that had survived ambition, betrayal, and heartbreak. Their story had begun with friendship, been tested by the crushing weight of success, and was reborn through love, the kind that no fortune could ever buy. And as they held each other close, Antonio knew without doubt that every misstep, every lost moment, had led them back to this truth. Some love was worth fighting for, worth remembering, worth living for. The Boston harbor stretched below the balcony of their new apartment, golden afternoon light glinting off the water as the city hummed quietly. The honeymoon had ended weeks ago, but the calm they had found together lingered. Life had settled into a rhythm, still busy, still filled with Antonio's meetings and calls, yet richer now with laughter, warmth, and the quiet certainty of a love that had been tested and survived. Sydney leaned against Antonio, her hand resting gently over her growing belly. The curve of it was a soft, constant reminder of the new life they had created together, a life that had grown from the love they had rebuilt, from trust earned through tears and honesty. "I can't believe how fast it's going," she murmured, glancing down at her stomach and then up at him, her eyes glowing with both awe and tenderness. Antonio smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It feels like a miracle every single day. I keep thinking I've earned a glimpse of heaven. And then I see you and I see this." He gestured to her belly, voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe I almost let it slip through my fingers." Sydney chuckled softly, leaning further into him. "I'm glad you remembered." He grinned, a mixture of relief and humility in his eyes. "I remembered, and I'll never forget again. Not the love, not you, not this little life we've created together." The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the city beyond the glass walls. Books lay open on the living room table, half-finished mugs of coffee, a blanket draped carelessly over the sofa, the comfortable chaos of home. It was nothing like the parties, the accolades, the high-profile events Antonio had once chased obsessively. This was real. This was theirs. "I was thinking about names today," Sydney said, smiling at him. "I can't decide if we're traditional or adventurous." Antonio laughed, lifting her hand to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Why not both? Something that honors the past but looks to the future." She laughed too, the sound warm and familiar. "I like that. Something that means love, loyalty, and a fresh start." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, their heads resting together as the sunlight played across the room. They didn't need words. They had rebuilt everything, their trust, their dreams, their home. They had survived the ambition, the neglect, the heartbreak. And now, with the child growing inside her, they were stronger than ever. Sydney pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "I was scared," she admitted softly. "I loved you so much, but I didn't know if we could come back from all that hurt." Antonio cupped her face gently, eyes shining. "I was scared too, but I realized something. Love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other, every single day, even when it's hard. And I choose you, Sydney, always." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of relief, of joy, and of gratitude. "I choose you too," she whispered. He pressed his forehead to hers. "And this little one," he said, resting a hand over hers on her belly. "We'll give them a world full of love, honesty, and laughter. A world better than the one I almost lost by forgetting what truly matters." They stood like that for a long moment, hearts beating together, feeling the quiet miracle of a life that had been rebuilt. Outside, the city carried on. The water sparkled, and the wind whispered gently around the balcony. Inside, they had found home. Inside, they had found each other. Their story had begun with friendship, tested by ambition and loss, and now reborn with love that no fortune could ever buy. And as they held each other close, Antonio whispered almost to himself, "I'll never forget again. Not this, not us, not the life we're building together." Sydney smiled, resting her head against his chest. "Good, because we have so much more to live, love, and laugh through. And this time nothing will ever break us." The harbor shimmered in the late afternoon sun, the city alive below them, but they didn't need it. They had everything, each other, their future child, and a love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. Thank you for being part of Whispers of Hope. Your love and support mean more than words. Together we're spreading light, one whisper at a time.